Welcome back to the Talking Hedge. I'm Josh Kincaid, and this is your Cannabis Business Podcast. Welcome to the Lemonhaze CannabisTech panel. Lemonhaze is a cannabis convention that celebrates the convergence of education, networking, business-to-business sales, and entertainment for the cannabis industry, fostering creative and professional growth alike. Lemonhaze is a premier destination for exploration and discovery of the legal cannabis industry. Founded in Seattle, Lemonhaze is best known for a party-like atmosphere approaching to growing the legal cannabis business and the convergence of education, networking, innovation, collaboration, and advocacy. An essential destination for industry professionals, Lemonhaze features bud tender education, business-to-business sales meetings, exhibits, product launches, podcasts, entertainment, and multiple networking opportunities. Lemonhaze provides business growth and creativity thrives when cannabis culture and traditional mainstream business practices come together. I'm your moderator, Josh Kincaid. I'm a capital market analyst and host of the Talking Hedge, your cannabis business podcast.
I'm your moderator. I'm Josh Kincaid. I'm a host of the Cannabis Business Podcast called The Talking Hedge. I'm also a capital markets analyst and wanted to really quickly run into the bios. The panel that I do at the World Trade Center once a month is 90 minutes. We're given about half that time, so jumping right into it. We've got Cy Scott. He's the CEO and co-founder with Hedge. Hedge turns retail data into real-time cannabis market insights and promotes better decision-making via market intelligence offerings and operational insights in a sleek, intuitive, and easy-to-use package. Prior to founding Hedge, Cy co-founded Leafly. Since Leafly's inception in 2010, Cy helped grow the site into the world's leading cannabis information resource and a model of success for ancillary brand in this new emerging industry. So Cy, thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thanks for coming, everybody.
Nick Jikomes is a PhD and principal research scientist at Leafly. Nick works to ensure that Leafly takes a data-driven approach to product development, content, and strategy. He leads efforts in research and business development, including partnering with cannabis testing facilities and producer processors to incorporate laboratory data on cannabis products into Leafly's massive consumer-facing platform. Nick, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And Ryan Porter, CEO of Top Tender. Top Tender is a first-of-its-kind trading platform designed to help educate and empower bud tenders in the burgeoning cannabis industry. Ryan was one of the three co-founders previously working together building Grassroots Digital, which was acquired by Baker Technology in November 2017, which went public on the Canadian Stock Exchange this past December. Ryan, welcome aboard.
Thank you.
All right, so this first question is going out to Cy. So I want to ask you what you're seeing as the biggest challenge in the industry. According to the legal arm of Washington State's Liquor and Cannabis Board, their current traceability solution meets all the legislative requirements expected of a traceability solution, and yet Washington State's seed-to-sale trace and tracking system has not properly been working since October of 2017. So is a functional seed-to-sale system the biggest challenge, or what do you see in the cannabis segment at the moment as the biggest challenge?
Yeah, it's a good question. Certainly, seed-to-sale traceability and tracking is problematic, I think, in a lot of markets. Here, there's been some pain with the transition off of BioTrack and still some challenges around that. I know in California, they're still struggling with the metric rollout. So I think, it's a combination of technology and implementation and kind of legislation as well, and how that all goes together. So kind of the technology piece, obviously can be challenging, but then there's the adoption piece. So I think, in that specific context, that's really what's happening there. In general, like when I think about technology and cannabis and why, I got involved in the cannabis space on the tech side was just opportunity to be able to scale the company, to be able to service multiple markets, Washington and California and Canada and so on. But I think, the biggest challenge for the technology side is it's easier and easier to build things. When we put together Leafly back in 2010, it was maybe a little harder than it would be, to get to the MVP, the first version, as bit easier today, but I think now the challenge really is on adoption and kind of cutting through the noise and getting people to leverage the services. Building something's easy, it's getting everyone to use it that's hard. And I think you're seeing that on the traceability side with things like Metric in California right now.
So as a follow-up to the panel, anybody that has a strong opinion, what type of technology is currently being adopted and what needs to be adopted?
I'll take I think when it comes to the technologies being adopted, I think we're really starting to see a lot of operational tools. I say that like in like the early phase of recreational cannabis, there's been a lot of great tools, and I'll like use headset as an example. I think people used it and looked at it like wanting to know about the industry, where now they're actually using the tool to operate their business. And I think that's what I see in a lot of tools. There's early on like excitement over this shiny tool and that shiny tool, whether it was an online ordering platform or a loyalty platform. People are now getting to the point where, what does it do for me? Is it giving me the result? I think that's kind of like the transition we see even in the larger multi-state operators is you have to run a great business now. You need to refine and specialize in that business to be successful.
Brian, why don't you hold on to that? So this next question is about technology. What technology is available to help bud tenders and customers make the right cultivar recommendation or purchasing decision? This question comes because I saw a couple of articles from Leafly. One is about bud tenders' primary goals, which is to sell the right strain. Four of those goals is to know your patient's needs, know your cannabinoids and terpenoids, know your grower, and know what's on the shelf. And another article by Leafly talking about bad bud tender habits to avoid, including the lack of knowledge about products they carry. So having said all of that, what technology is available to help bud tenders and customers make the right cultivar recommendation or purchasing decision?
Absolutely. Well, so, I've looked at this as a large problem. I first started to hear it from some brands in the space, and then I myself had opened up a store and saw, as a retail owner, what it was like to have my money sitting on the shelf and have a team that couldn't sell every single product I had. And so in that instance, we really kind of said, we've got to build this education system, one that can reduce training costs within our industry where we all participate. So in many industries, there's learning management software, but it's rare that you would have both brand manufacturers as well as like retail entities in the same tool. And so that's what we've been pushing for on Top Tender, easing and reducing the cost of training for retailers by being able to leverage brand education, pull it into their library and train their staff. I think it's something Leafly's pushing really hard on right now with the new cannabis guide, so I'll pass it to Nick too.
So I think bud tender and consumer education are super important, and building tools that allow them to do that type of work are important. But actually, other things that I think are really needed right now on the technology side are tools for product identification and authentication. So, you could be the most knowledgeable consumer bud tender in the world and walk into a dispensary, but the thing with the Blue Dream label and the numbers on the package, even though it's been tested and it's got this, what's ostensibly a certification or stamp of approval from the state, it may not be what it says it is. The percentages might be off. There's probably information that's not there that needs to be there, and there's no guarantee or real regulation around what things are named and what they're called. And so I think a big component of bud tender education and consumer education, whatever form that takes, is actually building in tools that allow them to have access to, I guess what we would just call product authentication. So those are all things that we're interested in at Leafly, and some of the tools that we've been building and we're continuing to build. And a lot of it comes back to those testing labs. So a lot of that data is super valuable, and I think it enables really exciting new technology development, because from that information, you can build educational tools. That's what the Cannabis Guide is. That's what our new Leafly Learn system for bud tenders is. And you can start tying that into product authentication mechanisms and start alerting bud tenders and consumers to to what's real and what's maybe not real, quote unquote.
I think it's a really interesting problem, actually, especially for this space. I'm sure anybody in the room who runs a retail or has exposure to retail or even a product manufacturer knows that so many consumers, as much as we'd all love them to go to Leafly and do research ahead of time, they'll walk in and not have a good understanding of what they're purchasing or what they're looking to purchase, and they'll ask the bud tender. The bud tender is that front line. And you want the bud tenders to be, educated and knowledgeable to be able to make those recommendations for the consumer. So the consumer has a good experience. They come back and they recommend, the cannabis industry. You don't want them to just, pick up whatever the bud tender's favorite, high potency concentrate might be, if they're looking for something, lighter or what have you. But really solving that problem is critical. And I do think technology can help scale that out, because it's critical. It's hard to market in this space. It's hard as a brand to get your brand in front of a lot of people. Like can't advertise on Facebook, and the traditional kind of the traditional challenges that people market in, where consumers might get that kind of information, is not there. So they're at the mercy of the bud tender. So the more the bud tender can be educated through technology, I think the better.
Agreed. Back to you, Nick. Wondering how does a customer wade through thousands of different products and arrive at a possible choice? Washington is the only state with recreational cannabis where pot stores can't be owned by pot farmers or pot processors. And this division between the production business and retail stores has led to a huge array of different brands and products. Washington has more cannabis brands and products than Oregon and Colorado combined. So Brian Yeager of Lemonhaze was quoted as saying, "Bud tenders absolutely drive customer decisions. Consumers are walking into recreational cannabis shops with no idea of how many options are available," end quote. Many retail stores stock a wide array of brands, as many as 2,800 different products. So Nick, how does a customer wade through the thousands of different products and arrive at a possible choice?
They don't. No one in this room can name 1,000 strains. You can't name 1,000 brands of toilet paper. That's too many things to keep track of. So I think the solution there is, how do you build mechanisms so that consumers can actually simplify that product space? Meaning, instead of having to try and think about 1,000 different brands and 1,000 different strains, how do you help consumers realize that there's actually just a few basic types of stuff out there? Because that's actually the way cannabis is. So if you look at, we can talk about form factors and all that stuff, but let's just talk about flower. So that's the #1 product category by sales volume. And there's thousands of strain pages on Leafly. There's thousands of strains out there, allegedly. And there's thousands of brands, but really there's just a handful of basic types of cannabis. And so Leafly's approach to helping them wade through those thousands of products is really just to start to educate consumers and bud tenders and retailers and brands that really there's just a few basic types. And if you learn what that schema is or what that organization is, it becomes a lot easier to navigate the product landscape, because you're not actually navigating 1,000 things now. You're just navigating 5 or 6. So, for example, an analogy I like to use is think about other consumable categories like alcohol. So something like wine or beer. So I know a little bit about wine, but not like a lot. There's thousands of bottles of wine out there. There's all sorts of vineyards. There's all sorts of detail you can get into. But really, there's red wine and there's white wine and there's sparkling wine. And I know a little bit more than that. So there's red wine, but then there's Pinots and there's Syrahs and there's Cabernets. And that's about all I know. But that's all I need to know in order to effectively order a glass of wine at a restaurant or buy a bottle. And so I think we need to create the right educational structures to simplify, to build a schema. That's one way of saying it. To build a way for consumers to recognize that there's actually a much smaller number of basic types of things out there. And so you take a problem with 1,000 dimensions and you basically compress it to one with just 5 or 6. And that's actually how you do it. You do that by educating the consumers directly, and then also indirectly by educating people like the bud tenders, since they're really sort of the point of contact for the vast majority of consumers.
All right, Sai. How often are you seeing companies capitalizing on advances in innovative technology? Current factors contributing to cannabis's growth, all of which require capital, have been tech, product diversity, state and international expansion, and displacement of the black market. So what's your 10,000-foot view of where we're at right now in context of how you view the tech landscape? And as a follow-up, how often are you seeing companies actually capitalizing on advances in innovative technology?
Yeah, so with Headsets, our analytics company, we started about 5 years ago, and I feel like there was this big wave of companies that kind of started right around that same time, Baker being one of them, a lot of point-of-sale providers. So I think that we're all sort of hitting our stride. There's a point-of-sale called FlowHub that just recently announced that they did their Series A capital raise, and you kind of see more and more of that because everyone's kind of moving into that stage of the business. So from like a fundraising perspective, still pretty early, but you kind of have a model that's proven, have product market fit, and kind of now you're just really scaling that up. So I think that's where a lot of like the ancillary side of tech is right now. I think there's still plenty of opportunities, plenty of gaps in the space, plenty of areas where people can make investments in technology. So lots of room yet, but I feel like there was just this massive wave of companies on the ancillary side that kind of popped up about 5 years ago, and companies are still popping up, but I feel like it's not maybe I don't notice it as much, or some of the bigger problems have been solved, So that, and then on the adoption side, I think that, it's getting there. I think like these multi-state operators, the bigger organizations that, are used to adopting tech in other verticals, like when they have people that come from, the alcohol world or retail world, like traditional retail, they're used to leveraging technology to streamline operations, and I think they're bringing that with them. We try and provide a platform for all shapes and sizes, all businesses, because cannabis is a spectrum of business types. You've got the smaller retailers, you've got the large multi-state retailers. But yeah, getting that adoption, I think it just varies on type of company, the size of company. A small company, it's harder to adopt all these tech services. Even though it might be helpful, there's just only so much time in the day and mind share and all of that, where you don't have a dedicated analyst to be, logging in, looking at the metrics all the time. That might be tough if you're just, one of a small team. So I think it really just varies on size and scale of the company. But we're seeing more and more adoption where it used to be, at least from our lens on the market data side, we really have to evangelize on the benefits of market data and how it's leveraged in other verticals and really, sell it. Now, people, we're doing less selling of the idea, more just selling of the service.
Either of you guys have any thing you want to add to the 10,000-foot view of where we're at right now with cannabis tech landscape, or how often you're seeing companies capitalize on advances in innovative technology?
I think there's a variety of tech available out there, but it's the skill set to use it. And so there's a lot of for us that do sell products to retailers, to brands. It's not uncommon that you sell into a store and it doesn't get adopted, and because it comes down to perhaps business not having the time or the skill set to do it. So I think our industry growing the professionals that have the skill set in the area is really critical to new tech coming and being successful and surviving. And I think I think even for the gorilla of Leafly, it's a reality of you have to have great people on the other side to use that tech for it to be successful.
So Nick, this next one's going back to you. How can we use technology to interpret terpene percentages and cannabinoids so that it translates to the consumer? Strain names pose an issue on multiple levels. They have zero regulation. Their properties will vary according to grow conditions. So this leaves consumers having to sort through hundreds of names without knowing its authenticity. So yet the term sativa indica hybrid are still used. Redefining and minimizing the use of indica, sativa, and hybrid technology is a crucial step towards better, more consistent experiences with cannabis. So Nick, how can you use technology to interpret these terpene percentages and cannabinoids so that it actually translates to the consumer?
Good question. I've thought about this. I think you need, so if you actually want to, so at the end of the day, I think the problem is very simple, but the solution is very hard. The problem is simple. Cannabis products affect your conscious experience. They're psychoactive. This is a psychoactive product. People want to feel good. They want to feel better than they feel right now when they try a cannabis product. And they want the bud tender, they want Leafly, they want the manufacturer to tell them, how am I going to feel when I try this product? And so everybody's trying to answer that question directly, right? All the brands are branding their product as sleepy, dopey, happy, creative. All the bud tenders are saying you're going to feel this way, trust me. But what's really difficult is you're telling the customer what they want to hear, but you're going to get it wrong a lot of the time, and that's they do get it wrong a lot of the time. And the reason for that, and I think the way you solve it is you have to understand that the effects you feel from a cannabis product are going to depend on you as an individual. So the same product can make two different people feel different ways. That's basically a fact. And so how do you get around that problem? Well, I think ultimately the way you really truly get around that problem with any precision is you need to have three things in place. And we've got one or two of them in place right now. One is you need to have understanding of the actual product composition and come up with a way to communicate that to the consumer. So that's what the Leafly Cannabis Guide is trying to do. So that's a framework for understanding cannabis products based on their actual composition. But that's not enough. Because the same product with the same composition can have two very different effects on two different people, or two very different effects on the same person at two different times, right? So the way that I'm going to feel in response to the product I bought today is going to be different than the way I feel 5 years from now, or 10 years from now, or even 5 days from now, potentially, based on my use history and changes in my body. So that's another complication. The way you solve that is you have to understand the inputs from the consumer. So what context are they consuming in? How much are they consuming? So there, on the technology side, I'm thinking about how do you collect information and reviews about the setting the consumer's in, and ultimately, how do you collect information related to dosing, for example. So I'm very interested in, say, vaping technologies that are keeping precise track of the actual dose and the effective composition of what's leaving the device, as opposed to just what's in the base product. That's another important area where I think tech development's really interesting. How do you actually keep track of what's coming out of that product they bought and going into their body? And then the third thing is actually just to understand and use technology to understand the composition of the person. So one example of that there is there's a lot of companies now doing basically 23andMe for cannabis, or the endocannabinoid system. So the enzymes in your liver and my liver are not going to process cannabis products the same way. And that's another reason why just knowing product composition, just knowing the brand name, even if it's all authenticated, is not going to be enough to have precise predictions on the outcomes for customers. So I think you need technology related to product composition and how you communicate that to consumers. So that's the Leafly Cannabis Guide. You need technology related to precise knowledge of what they're putting in their body. So that would be, like smart vaporizers that are keeping track of the dose and everything. And then you need to actually understand the composition of the person effectively. So you need inputs in your customer reviews and from ultimately the person's genetics and biology.
And is there a better, more accurate system than using sativa versus indica?
Yes, it's called Leafly Cannabis Guide. Yeah, so basically, again, it's a simple problem, but the solution is pretty tricky. So in essence, it's like, okay, there's different cannabis products. Everyone would agree to that. They can do different stuff to you. I think everyone would agree to that. The reason that they have an effect on you is because they have pharmacologically active ingredients. So if you want to understand the difference between products, you need to understand the chemical difference in their active constituents. So the best way to segment products in order to distinguish products that have different effects or that will have different effects is to segment them based on their actual composition. And so that's conceptually easy, but it's difficult to do because you need the right data, meaning you need to have data that you can trust and that it's accurate. So that's the lab testing data. But not all of the lab test results are the same. So if you send 2 products to 2 labs, you might get 2 different quantitatively or even qualitatively different results. So you need to have a way to ingest that data, and then you need a way to actually segment and make visible that information to the consumer in a way they can understand. But if you can do that, then yes, there is. And so once you segment the products based on their active ingredients, which is what we're doing with the Cannabis Guide, so their cannabinoids primarily and their terpenes secondarily, then you can be very confident that 2 different types of products are actually going to have different effects. The reason that's superior to the indica-sativa hybrid thing is simple. If I take 2 random indicas out of a hat, there's actually a very good chance they're not going to be the same product from a composition standpoint. If I take a random indica and a random sativa, there's actually a decent chance they are going to be similar, even though they've got those different labels. And so, so the answer is yes, there is a better system, and that is what we built with the Cannabis Guide. Segment the products based on what their actual active ingredients are.
All right, Ryan. Is 2019 the year you should get involved in the cannabis industry, or is it too late to jump in? The cannabis industry is quickly becoming big business. Last year, U.S. consumer spending eclipsed $10 billion for the first time and is projected to increase to $23 billion in the next 2 years. Investment activity boomed last year, increasing almost $14 billion. All this growth comes amidst continued federal prohibition of the industry's staple product. Currently, 33 states plus D.C. have a medical marijuana program, while 11 states plus D.C. have legalized cannabis for adult use. Top investment trends for the first half of 2019 were multi-state operators, data, and consumption lounges, more like a real estate investment trust. Specific investment drivers were vape, like you mentioned, beverages, and then this year has been cultivation retail, and then accurate dosing technology. And yet, most of the publicly traded cannabis indexes and ETFs have retraced more than 60%. So having said that, is 2019 the year you should get involved in the cannabis industry, or is it too late to jump in?
So my look at this, and I really look at it from like a brand and product aspect, is I think with where we're at in the cannabis industry, I think everything that does exist today will not exist tomorrow. That a product, take any category, it can be beat out by a better product launch tomorrow, better go-to-market strategy. So I think everything that we see on our shelves, even here in Washington, where retailers have 1,000+ SKUs on the shelf, I think they can all be gone. So therefore, if you're a new processor producer coming into the industry, I think it's absolutely reality that you can have a number one product. And then I think on the retail side, we're seeing a lot of turnover on retail, and we're seeing some really good operators, really kind of refine the skill set inside and tune those businesses. And that's just the reality that we're in the very early days. And last week I was out of the country, and I met with a 20-year-old who sold drugs in Ireland, had a conviction there, but is just absolutely excited about this industry and is digesting everything he can on YouTube in order to learn about it. And he's just, what country do I need to go to get into it? So I think as we think of it on a global scale, it's absolutely day one. And for me, one thing I'm really excited about is marketplaces. I don't think we've really seen marketplaces play an active role in the industry, but I think that's going to be really important in all of our businesses, whether we're retailers or processor producers. But there's no clear winner in it, and eventually I believe we'll have a global marketplace brand, and I think that's going to be exciting over the next decade.
Come see us when you're done.
You guys have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would just definitely agree 100% that the opportunity is massive yet, for opportunity to come and take away some entrenched players, but also for the entrenched players to keep scaling out. It's like hard for me personally to even stay on top of what's going on in international markets and in Europe and in Mexico and even progress in Canada. It's pretty massive, and I think that if a lot of operators are probably involved here in Washington. Washington is one of the most mature markets next to Colorado, and Washington has a very unique model that I obviously biased here in Seattle, but I really think that there's a lot of learnings from like a brand perspective. It's a trial by fire when you're up against 1,000 other brands at a retailer. So if you're successful here, I think that success can be reproduced outside of Washington in the broader international markets or just national, whatever it may be. So I think there's a ton of opportunity. I think that with the capital markets or the public markets and that kind of correction that happened is probably a good thing. But a lot of those operators, they're different than kind of operators we see here that are really close to it, and understand it really well. So I think there's an opportunity for organizations from markets like Washington to really capitalize on that and show people how to do it.
So this is the point where we get to the crystal ball experience, asking where you see opportunities for growth in 2020 within the cannabis tech space. California kind of leads the market with popularity in cultivars. So when some, let's say Blue Dream of 2008 leaves California, it hits Colorado about 6 to 9 months later, and then at least a year it'll hit Washington after it becomes popular in California. So I don't think we have any tech indicators that tells us what's going to become popular, but what do you see as an opportunity for growth in 2020 within the cannabis tech space?
So one of the things that we've been working on at Leafly has been, how do we actually utilize some of the consumer data that we have to actually potentially identify trends as they emerge before they really manifest themselves out in the market. So for example, there's when you look at search data on Leafly, or you look at what people are looking at, what they're ordering, you see trends as they emerge, right? Some things are going up, some things are going down, but what's also very interesting is that it's not the same everywhere. So what's happening today in California might be what's happening tomorrow in Colorado, or vice versa, or what's happening today in California might be very different from what's happening in Massachusetts, and it will continue to be different 6 or 12 or 18 months from now. So one of the things that we've been looking at Leafly, for example, is what are the search trends in terms of strain names, flavors, and what we're working on now is the composition of the actual product. So there are interesting trends in terms of some of the things that we're seeing there. And so off the top of my head, I would say I think some strains are going to wax and wane in popularity. For example, I think certain types of strains with certain flavor or effects profiles are going to start to wax and wane in popularity. We see a lot of indicators that strains with certain types of aromas, such as fruity aromas, do really well with consumers. That they might be undersupplied relative to the demand. It seems to be latent in the data that we see at Leafly. And so, sort of our crystal ball is starting to look at and shape that data in order to understand ourselves what's going to be popular, use that internally, but also provide that information to retailers and brands. So when you look at some of the trend lines from 2 years ago, you can start to see indications that, okay, maybe Blue Dream's not going to be the most popular strain forever. Things like Gelato or Purple Punch or things with certain types of profiles are really going to start to become popular today, and that's actually what we're starting to see. So I guess that's one answer to the question. So we've been interested in building some of those products for a while now, and we're interested in tying that to the Cannabis Guide as well. So some of the stuff that we talked about earlier, just to give one example, there's certain strains with certain profiles that really seem to have outsized demand relative to their supply. So only about 10% of the strains that are out there are the orange ones that I showed images of, terpinolene dominant. And there's probably good reasons for that in terms of the grow characteristics of those strains. But I think if producers and growers can learn to capitalize on the consumer, the supply-demand mismatch, and start to build cultivars or start to build new products with those types of formulations, they will be able to meet consumer demand where it's going rather than where it's at today.
What's the most interesting trend you guys have seen in 2019? Or what's the most interesting trend that you think will come in 2020?
Yeah, that's good. I'm trying to think. Recent trend, interesting, is the vapor pen response. So, the media cycle, obviously, a lot of information around, these deadly vapor pens that, aren't necessarily sold at cannabis retail or licensed retailers. But it really did impact sales pretty significantly. That was an interesting trend to see just how, even though there wasn't overlap necessarily directly, but just kind of some consumer, whatever it was, some fear they didn't want to purchase or not nearly as much. It's funny when we look at the numbers in Washington. It's pretty interesting around discounts. So given that the flavored vapor pen ban was coming down, retailers heavily discounted as much as 40% on flavored vape carts, and it went from I think like 15%, 19% market share to like 25% market share of sales. Yeah, it was crazy, which is kind of the inverse of what they wanted, what the state wanted, right? Like they wanted to stop selling them, but they really started flying off the shelves at that point. But that's an interesting trend, just how we're in a very well-regulated industry, potentially overly regulated at times, and it still impacted our sales. So that was just something like pretty recent that we've seen. I'm sure there's.
How does that relate to Oregon? We saw about 4 years ago when the Oregon marketplace completely banned all solvents. We saw rosin makers just make a killing. And so I've always thought in the back of my mind that's a great differentiator, have that in case of anything that's happening. What do you think is going to happen already with the live rosin? That's we've seen 300 to 400% increase, maybe due to the perception that it's healthier or more natural. Are you already starting to see those trends of solventless products increasing? I saw the hockey stick on the sales, by the way, and that was phenomenal. It was crazy.
Yeah, certainly. I think so. I think that some of the rosin or percentages skyrocketing is a relatively small percentage of sales. So any sort of change, you see some sizable, triple-digit percentages. But I think more of that certainly as consumers become more educated, you'll start to see more of that happening regardless of category.
All right, this may be one of the last questions before we open it up to the floor. Is there an opinion that you guys used to hold really firmly and had for a long time that's changed in the last 18 months?
I guess one small example, I didn't necessarily hold this super firmly, but I started at Leaf about 3 years ago, and I just, I kept hearing a lot of people talk about edibles and beverages. That those are going to be huge, those are going to overtake everything. Flour's going to die. It's all going to be about edibles and beverages over the next few years. And when a new product category enters the market, it almost has to increase its market share because it wasn't around before. But all the data I've seen from Leafly and elsewhere doesn't seem to indicate that. So people often. So I kind of believed it at first because before I started really looking at the data, it was like, okay, maybe edibles and beverages are going to be the future. I don't believe that today. I didn't necessarily strongly believe that previously, but I personally think that inhalable products are still going to dominate. I think concentrates probably, the current crisis notwithstanding, probably still chip away at flower over the next few years. But I personally don't believe that 3 or 5 or even 7 years from now, edibles and beverages are going to be the #1 product category. And that was something that I guess I leaned towards early on, just because a lot of people were saying it.
Yeah, I had an opinion about branding about 18 months ago. We saw, a lot of different singers, songwriters, artists, rappers, whatever, and didn't really increase sales. So my opinion from 2 years ago is that branding didn't matter. The #1 question that we still see is what's the highest THC at the lowest price. So it's about budget. It's not really about any rapper or whatever. I now believe that brands are becoming more important as consumers want a safe, reliable product. They've been told by these bud tenders, here's what meets your price point. They're going back to those. So it's not necessarily the brand they're going after, but whatever fits their price point. I think that we're starting to see a point where brands are really going to start to play a larger role. Is there anything else you guys feel that you had a change in opinions over the last 18 months?
Yeah, for me personally, I thought the CBD kind of adoption would have tapered off a bit from a consumer interest and just kind of the media and the hype cycle around it, but it still continues to climb. It's pretty surprising, just you see it everywhere basically, and I thought there would be an eventual backlash, just based on it's in everything. What is it really? But the interest still seems to be there. The sales that we're able to see on the adult use side, continue to climb, particularly non-inhalables, which makes sense, like topicals, tinctures, things like that. But on the mainstream, retail outlet, kind of the adoption that I'm seeing at grocery, drugstores, things like that, seems to continue to grow. So that's something that I thought would be kind of a come and go, kind of a hype cycle, but it seems to be here to stay.
I agree with you that that was a hype cycle, and if you had to project that out another year or two, do you think it's going to fizzle, or do you think there's some runway ahead of it still?
I mean, yeah. It's got to fizzle at some point, or there's got to be some education around it, or something's going to come out, but I don't know when that's going to be.
I don't know if this means anything, but one thing I noticed just the other day, so one of the first things I did at Leafly when I started was I just typed in, I knew about CBD from being in the research world. And 3 years ago, even at Leafly, most people in the office didn't know what CBD was. And I remember typing in CBD into Google Trends, and it was going up, and I was like, oh wow, it's going up. Fast forward 3 years later, and it's like 10x, 20x where it was in terms of search volume. And just by chance yesterday, for some reason, I looked at it again. And actually, it peaked in May, and now it's gone down since May quite a bit. I don't know what that means. I don't know if that means if interest is going down or people just know what CBD is and they're not looking to educate themselves as much. But that was one interesting data point I noticed.
Yeah, on the CBD piece, I think we all know that we're seeing the prices absolutely crash. So I think on the sales side, I think we're going to see the growth in terms of units. Just not going to have a profit margin because the oversupply is real. I know Josh follows this a lot on the oversupply of CBD and the pricing. But so I think on a unit level, though, I think we're going to see it more products, and I'd say that hype will continue for a lot. I know Sai used to talk a little bit about new products to market. Do you guys track that on the CBD side? And have we seen a slowdown just in general on cannabis products coming to market?
Yeah, we definitely do. I haven't looked at it in the context of CBD for sometimes. I couldn't say without looking at headset for that. But yeah, that'd be an interesting thing to look at. And you're absolutely right about pricing. CBD used to be essentially 2x, like the dollar price for the same package size. Now it's more in line. It's only like 5-10% more of a premium on cost. So I think you're right. Like you're going to still see more units, but less of a revenue impact.
Are there any other questions? Yes.
Sales technology in cannabis. I'm just wondering about home delivery and the technology around that, and the fact that I think that the screen generator and finding my flowers would be really interesting because I'm seeing my house, I don't have a bunch there. I just love to have you guys talk to the fact that how will our experience change and how the industry will change home delivery, like when you don't have that bunch of tender there, you're relying more on technology and technology
a great question. To paraphrase, she's asking, how is the experience going to change with home delivery technology?
Yeah, I guess a couple of thoughts there. One, I think things like the Cannabis Guide are necessary in order to maximize the value of delivery. So, you know, if I don't go into the store and I don't have that face-to-face human interaction with an expert or a potential expert, there needs to be some sort of technology solution to provide that expertise. And so, you know, we're hoping that things like the Cannabis Guide set us up to do that at Leafly. I think the other thing I think about there too is, you know, I think there's always going to be, maybe not always, but for the foreseeable future, there's going to be a lot of people, even in a legal market, even 7 years into a legal market, there's still that social stigma. So I think there's a lot of people out there who are potential consumers, and they just don't have it in themselves to walk into the dispensary for reasons of social stigma. And so I think delivery technology opens you up to actually reaching those consumers. And when you have it, I think it's tough to do delivery for many reasons. But when you have it, then you need that extra step of like, okay, how am I actually going to get that person to a product that's going to work for them when I don't have that face-to-face interaction? So I think things like the Cannabis Guide sort of give us a framework to start to think about how we do that. But it's definitely a big opportunity and a huge challenge.
One of the largest opportunities, I think, is the topicals and tinctures markets. Suppositories, for example, people don't want to go and buy a suppository from a 21-year-old. So with the advent of delivery and vending machines, I think you'll see a huge uptick in topicals, tinctures, and other products.
Yeah, I think when it comes to that delivery, you're going to make that order through a platform of some type, a menu type of ordering. And I'd say I think there's going to be plenty of hope in the sense that we've yet to see like web chat really hit our industry. But it sits in legal, it sits in auto, it sits in a lot of industries. I've got a partnership with a large web chat client in the automotive space who's starting to look at the cannabis industry and understand how to service it. A lot of web chat clients, they actually they have their call centers and their chat centers in areas of hospitality. So Orlando's a huge one, where I think I wouldn't be surprised that in 5 years we could look at Leafly, and Leafly will likely have 100 people in a call center working those web chats, giving that same bud tender experience through that in the delivery platform. That was one thing I was thinking on the trends because a year ago or 2 years ago, I would have thought I wasn't for delivery. I said, oh, it's unsafe. I don't want, a 22-year-old girl out on the road with, $3,000 and $5,000 worth of product. But I haven't seen it. We actually have a number of delivery services, not in Washington, but in California, there's a handful of different deliveries. Nevada's new popular. And thus far, they're not having the crime that I would have anticipated in delivery. So I think it's something that's safer than I had anticipated.
I think a really cool byproduct of technology and delivery is the consumer experience, because as you order stuff, you can rate the things right there and you actually purchased it, and then you can start to recommend things that might be similar. It's a bit more challenging without going to a Leafly and plugging in your data at that point. Like, I purchased this, I rate it like this. Kind of like the Amazon model, where it's like you might also I feel like you're going to see more and more of that driven by the delivery service, just because it's built into the app itself.
And not just cannabis, but we're seeing Nordstrom that has no clothes. They have a computer and one employee. You go in and you pick the clothes you want online. They take your measurements, and then you come back and pick up your clothes. So that whole experience of going in and picking up what you want is changing outside of cannabis as well. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I know you guys are all more on the consumer-facing side, but representing the company. So in your guys' adventures on the manufacturing side of things, have you heard any rumblings on anything as far as automation advancements or robotic advancements or anything manufacturing efficiencies side of things?
Yes.
What's fun?
Yeah, there's a lot of automation, and that comes with the Banking Act. So mostly California, Canada are into the automation. So there's pre-rolled joints and blunts. Obviously, that's big. How big your kitchen is, and that's normal, right? For edible companies, beverage companies, there's automation lines available right now. $30,000 for a 6-head bottling machine, rather than just polling and capping that people are doing cold brew.
Sorry to interrupt. We're still having trouble with things that can be weighed, like true weighing, and they will separate buds at different sizes.
The multi-head check weigh system from Olson and Paxium, and There's a multi-head check weight system that's accurate to 1/100th of a gram. It's good for Health Canada. So I would use that for not only your pre-roll manufacturing, but for edibles or anything. Olson and Paxium. I don't want for either.
And on the grow side, I'm familiar with the company TriGrow. They have offices here. They're kind of like grow in a box for consistency, which I think is important for the consumer too, right? When you find a brand and a product that you like, and then to have that consistent supply on the flower side is important. So it might be someone to look at from the production side.
Yeah, the lack of automation directly comes from the lack of capital.
Absolutely. I understand that 100%. I'm just excited to see what comes.
Definitely.
Because you guys are all representing the forward-facing and the opportunities available, and there's a huge open space in the manufacturing side.
Yes.
That's left wide open that still needs to be filled. Because it's not just traceability. That's not the only problem to solve in manufacturing. There's a lot of other things, processing, analysis, and efficiencies. So it's exciting to see what's coming.
Yeah, shameless plug for the Talking Hedge. There's Scaling for Success, automating the cannabis industry. So if you go to the Talking Hedge.
Just subscribe to you, bro.
Oh, appreciate it.
Yeah. I'm interviewing for it right now.
It's good. It's good looking out. Thank you.
I'm going to New England. I'll tell them all about you over there.
I appreciate it. Anybody else have any questions? No? All right. I want to thank my panelists. We have Cy Scott, CEO and co-founder of Headset. Appreciate you being on the panel. Nick Jikomes, PhD, principal research scientist with Leafly. Thank you for being on board. And then Ryan Porter, CEO of Top Tender. Thanks for being here.
And with that, we're going to roll this one up. I'm Josh Kincaid. This is the Talking Hedge. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Or don't. And I'm out.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, everybody.